We're going to begin part 8 by building our framing jig. And we want to do that by first setting in our keel, by putting the stem and the stern post here in their notches, and then setting up the first frame, a center frame, and the end frame. And we want to do that to create a structure so we could flip it over and drop in our frames into the notches in the jig and into the notches in the keel. Now I have found building these hulls in framing jigs to work quite well, but they are not foolproof, but at least they minimize the margin of error when you're setting up your frames. So I'll show you how we start. Okay, you cannot just take these frames and just set them in this jig, because if I let this go, you can see we have that much movement in the frame. Also, these frames move like this. Okay, you can see that movement. And it also has a very slight movement. You can hear it side to side. So, when you're setting in your frames, I use this block of aluminum. And you can use a block of wood as long as it's cut at a nice square 90 degrees, like so. Because you're going to take this, line it up with your notch in your jig, and then push your frame against the face of your block. So it is perfectly straight up and down, like so. Okay, now to minimize this movement right here, going back and forth, you're also taking this frame, and as you can see, I've centered it right in that notch. You can see the little space right, on either side of it. And the reason why there's a space on either side is because when I drew up the cutting file for this jig, I did not compensate for the laser kerf, which was 10 thousandths, and it took 10 thousandths out of this side and 10 thousandths out of this side, making this notch 20 thousandths too wide. And when I sanded the frame, I took a little bit more off, so that ended up giving me that kind of fit. So I'm going to go ahead and build this hull, and I'm going to center each one of my frames in here, and then once I get them centered and laid up, then I'm just going to use epoxy and glue them in place. Now when I do the run on the kits, now that I know that these are too big, I'm going to make these 20 thousandths smaller, so it's going to have a tighter fit when the frames fit in, and you won't have to bother, trying to fit these. The reason why I'm showing you why I'm using these little shims on these frames like this is because if you're building this from scratch and you're cutting this jig out by hand, it is almost impossible to cut every single one of these notches exactly the same and to within a few thousandths of an inch. So you're going to have play in your frames. So shimming them back and forth is a way to solve that problem. Let's go back to work here and install this first frame. I'm going to put this keel in here, okay? The reason I want to put my keel in, because I want to make sure that it's down flat, and I need my notch to set the notch for this frame in place. So let me clamp this down here. Okay, that's where I want it. Now to put this thing in place, like I showed you, if I set this in here, okay, it goes right there. Let me get this in. Let me get that stem in. Okay, got it. Got it in place. Oh, did you hear it snap in there? Okay, so I'm going to clamp this on here, like so. Now, before I glue this frame in place, I want to take one of these shims, and I want to put it in the front of the frame here. Okay, you see right down in there like this. And I'm going to take another one, and I want to put it on this side. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to see how square this frame is sitting. Okay, let me put this in here. Now I'm going to push this up against the frame and up against that first shim. And let me check that. Dead on. Beautiful. Okay, now I know that's square. Let me show you what I did close up. See, that's what I did close up. I put a shim on this side, put a shim over there, and push my block up against the frame, and as you can see, it's square. So now I know I could take this block away, pull it away from there like that, and put my other shim on that side and glue it up. And after a check, it is dead on. Perfect. Okay, let me take my block out of there. Now I can go ahead and put my second set of little pieces of cardboard in there, like so. Where's the other one? Here's the other one. And slip it in there. It's a nice snug fit now. And fit it in there like that. Okay, now you can see they're in there and they're ready for their little blob of glue. Now before I put the glue in, I want to push down on this frame to make sure it's sitting on the glass, which it is. I want to pull it towards the outside of the notch. Okay, everything is good. So if you're wondering what I'm doing on this nice snowy afternoon, is I cut a bunch of these strips of cardboard out of this box, and what I'm doing, there, see, and I'm gluing them on here so they're going to fit nice and snug in my jig when I put the frames in. So I'm going to continue on here and glue all my little shims on. One of the reasons why I put these little shims on the ends like this, so they fit very nice and tight in these notches, is this reason. It's you're going to end up doing things like this. And let me get very, very close and show you. See that right there? That's when I sanded these frames. This edge took a little bit more sanding than the rest of the frame. See how it tilts in like that? Well, that's a cause for that frame to fit very loose in the jig. Now let me find another one. Okay, let's look at this one up close. That one worked out perfectly fine. So you're going to get some. Let's look at them together. Okay, see, you're going to get some that are thin and some that are thick. There's really not much you can do about that. And here is another example of being a little too heavy-handed with sanding. See the end of that, the angle? Right here on this side.
Okay, and that also makes this frame fit loose in that jig. Okay, once all your shims are on, you want to go back and trim them to make sure they don't go beyond this edge right here. See that? You want to trim that off of there. And I'm using a scalpel because they are so sharp. You can make a nice clean cut of it. Get that off of there. Like this. See how nice I trim that off? So it's nice and flush with the edge. Because you want this edge here to rest against this edge here. So if you have that shim in the way, it's not going to rest against that edge.